Okay. Oh, hold on. Let's let Yoso come in. All right. Again, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Interschool Council's February hot topic on secondary grading. Lisa Prosnitz and I, Allison Crawford, are the co-presidents of the Interschool Council, which is the umbrella organization for our district's 11 home and school associations and the liaison between the home and school associations and the school district. The hot topics are every month, usually on the second Tuesday of the month. And it's a fantastic opportunity for parents and guardians to learn more about what's going on in the district and to ask questions to the administrators who are presenting. Next month's topic on March 12th will be wellness. Please join us, hopefully in person, and for coffee and a little chatting at 9:15 and the regular presentation starting at 9:30. They are offered hybrid, even if we are able to do it in person. This and every hot topic, almost every hot topic, is recorded and will be posted on the ISC's YouTube channel shortly. We will not record the question and answer portion. For that portion, please use the chat to post a question or the raise hand function, and we will attempt to call on you as time permits in the order that you have asked the questions. And as always, please keep your questions general, not specific, and no names, since we want to preserve the privacy of our students. If you have any more questions, please write us at iscinfonow@gmail.com and we will get back to you. With no further ado, I will introduce Dr. McGloin to talk about secondary grading.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Alexis McGloin, the Assistant Superintendent. And I thank you for having us here. Dr. Jason Lilly and I will be talking today about secondary grading. Some of it you've heard, maybe, if you listen to our presentations at the board level. And then some of it you haven't heard, because we're going to not only talk about the changes that we're making at the high school that we're in process of making with policy, but also we're going to talk about middle school report cards. So if we have any middle school parents or guardians on the call, you would have completed a survey for us, because we're in the process of updating our middle school report card. So we're just going to give you some information on that and where we sit in the process and where we're headed before we finalize any documents. So I think Jason will probably take over. I'm going to put up the presentation with the grading part, and then I'll pick up the middle school report card from there. So let me just figure out, I got to just share it. Just give me 1 second. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. And could everybody see my screen? I'm going to go from the beginning though. You see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Jason, you good to take over?
Yeah, well, I got something popped up on my screen. Just give me a second.
Okay.
All right, I think I'm okay. Sorry, when we switch from being at school to being at home, we have all kinds of different protocols we have to do on our computers to make everything work the way it would as if we were there. So I apologize. But good morning, and thank you everyone for coming today virtually. I'm going to jump in first. As Dr. McGloin said, I'm Dr. Jason Lilly. I'm the lead supervisor for curriculum and instruction for the district, currently K-12 everything STEM and our dual enrollment program. And I'm going to start by talking about the changes that are going on at the high school level specifically, and sort of the timeline and the process that we use to get there. And so there's 3 main parts of this. We're going to talk about the weighting of grades, weighting of courses that we have at the high school, which some of you are probably familiar with, some of you maybe not. How we calculate our GPA, and then also our graduation credits. Go ahead, next slide. So starting with this whole thing, I want to talk a little bit about our timeline. And this has been ongoing for a long, long time. I started working with the K-12 Grading and Reporting Committee well before COVID closed our district. And we went through all that. But I worked with Sean Hughes very closely. Those of you familiar with Sean Hughes, who was the high school principal at Lower Merion. He and I kind of co-chaired this committee, and then he passed the baton to me, and I took over the K-12 Grading and Reporting Committee. So what you see here is really a timeline post-COVID, but that's why we made sure we highlighted at the bottom that this has been a strategic plan focus of our redefining success pathway for a long, long time. And when I joined that with Sean, Sean said he'd been doing it close to 20 years. So this is a committee that has existed for a long time. And what we do is we review and revise our grading practices and how we report information out. So you'll hear about things like report cards, but also how we calculate grades, how we weight courses, and all the different things that are important to different people in different ways. And so what you see here is a more recent timeline and some of the stuff we went through before we made our recommendations to the board and ultimately made some of the changes we're sharing today. What I think is something you'll definitely see jump out here is the number of people involved in the process. We surveyed students, we surveyed staff members, we had ongoing discussions. We had to spend a lot of time with our high school department chairs who are representing their different departments and how the changes could potentially impact those departments. So they were heavily involved throughout the process, and obviously our principals. We've had different meetings, presentations, and then ultimately we had our more recent board presentation. And this is a multi-year process. And so we're going to take you through some of the highlights today, but we just wanted to make sure that people understood this. This has been ongoing work for a long, long time. Even before COVID, some of this stuff was in the works, and then we got derailed a little bit and came back. And so a couple years after that, here we are, and we'll share those changes today. Next slide, please. So there's three parts to this. I'm going to talk about them sequentially here. We're going to start with weighted grades, so how we weight different courses at the high school. And then we're going to move into how we calculate our GPA now and what the changes have done and how that impacts students. And then briefly talk about some of the changes to our graduation credit requirement, which is a result of some of the good things we do at Lower Merion. Next slide. So we'll start by jumping in with weighted grades. Again, I shared a little bit of the background to this, but we'll go into a little more detail with the weighting of grades, how we do things, why we're making some of the changes we're making, and the results of some of the survey information from both students and staff. And that's really the telling part of all this. And it'll get into the why and how we got to where we are with some of the recommendations and now the official changes. Next slide, please. So as I shared, there was a lot of committee work done. And one of the things you do when you start thinking about your practices is you look at what those around you are also doing. So at Lower Merion, at the high schools, we weight our honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. So again, I'll just make sure everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say that. So we have college prep level of courses, which is considered the on-level version of a course. We have honors versions of many courses that are kind of a step up from that. We have AP, which is advanced placement, which many colleges and universities do provide credit for if you attain a certain score on the AP exams. We have IB courses at Harriton, which is International Baccalaureate. And then we also have some dual enrollment courses, which are actually courses where students automatically get college credit from taking those courses at our high schools. So those are the different levels. Right now in this year and for the next couple of years, and we'll talk more detail as we go, but right now our practice is that any of those courses, honors, AP, IB, or dual enrollment, they all get an automatic +1 at the end of the course. So if a student were to earn a 3.0 in a course, it becomes a 4.0. We just automatically blanket add a +1 to their grade that they earned in that course. And there was some sense from the teachers that it seemed a little extreme, and we were hearing things like, well, it sounds like we're doing more than some of the other districts around us as far as just adding, points to someone's grade that they earned. And so we started exploring that. And what you see here is sort of a representative table of some of the things we compared to. Of course, we compared ourselves to Radnor and TE, and you can see how they weight their courses there and which courses are weighted in which ways. We used Upper Marion, which is our neighbor, and Wissahickon, which is another neighboring district that's high performing. And then we also compared ourselves to some schools that look like Lower Marion on the other side of the state. Upper St. Clair is a very similar district to us, and North Allegheny, again, a similar district to us, a little bit larger than Upper St. Clair. So when we looked at these different schools, there are some things that jump out. And the reality is everyone does this differently. But something that definitely stood out when we did the comparisons is Lower Marion was weighting their courses more than other districts, even local districts. So I'm just going to run through some of the things you see here and some of the things we considered. So at Radnor, instead of a +1, they add a third of a letter grade, so 0.333 to all their AP. They have honors in AP. TE does it a little different, and a lot of districts do this. They weight their courses differently. So their honors courses, they actually multiply the student grade by 12.5%. It's kind of unique. I haven't seen that really anywhere else. And then their AP courses, they multiply by 25%. So they're essentially adding a quarter of whatever the students earned onto their grade. So that was TE. Upper Marion, similar but different. So they add 0.2, so much less weight. They add a 0.2 to their honors in AP, but then they also add restrictions to that and say, but that only works, and we only add the extra weight if a student earns at least a 2.0 in the course. So anything below a 2.0. So if a student took an honors or AP course and really struggled, not only did they struggle, but they didn't get the weight, the added benefit that other students got in the class for performing better. So that's something we really didn't entertain. We really didn't like that. That wasn't received well in our district. And I think that was a good choice. Wissahickon also does something similar. There's weighting for some, but not others, not very inclusive. Upper St. Clair, similar practice there. So that's why those are in red, because anywhere you see red, that means those students did not get weight. They would not receive any weight for the grade they earned in those courses. North Allegheny, similar to Wissahickon and TE, they have a split process where honors gets a certain weight and AP gets a different weight. While that looks similar to TE, the difference is TE is multiplying the student grade by 1%, whereas North Allegheny actually adds 0.125 and then 0.25 for AP. So everyone does it different, but what we definitely saw throughout comparing to similar districts and local districts is we add a significant amount of weight more so than other districts for those particular courses. So this is what we started with. This is what we began considering as we entered into the conversation. Next slide, please. So throughout the presentation, you'll see some snippets from different surveys. We did multiple staff surveys for sure. This was early on in the process. So we just said, as a staff, would you be open to adjusting or changing the way our honors AP and IB courses are weighted? And overwhelmingly, 91% of our staff, these were high school only staff members, said that they would be willing to entertain other options and considerations when we consider how we do our weighting at Lower Marion, which was at the time an automatic +1 to every student who takes any one of those levels of courses. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit into this slide so you can see, you're going to see very similar pictures like this and slides as we progress through some of this conversation. What you see on the left-hand side are teacher responses, and what you see on the right-hand side are student responses. After some of our initial conversations, what we really wanted to do is see, how did the students think compared to the teachers? Were there similar thoughts? Were there big differences? And each one of these was sort of a belief statement or a question. So this particular one says, I believe the +1 bump influences choices during course selection. Again, these are things that were shared in conversation, whether it's students talking with counselors, whether it's teachers just thinking it's going on. But there was this idea out there that students are choosing courses based on the weight. So in other words, were students avoiding taking some college prep courses because they didn't get weight and every other version of a class did? So that was the essential question here. And again, I'm going to talk into this one a little bit because afterwards then we'll be okay with seeing the different colors. This works from top to bottom. The top bar, the green, being strongly disagree with the statement. The darker blue means they disagree. There was a neutral, which means they could choose not to answer or they didn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. So you have to take that into consideration with some of the responses. The light blue was agreeing with the statement, and then orange was strongly agreeing with the statement. What you're going to notice throughout most of the responses is the teachers and students are aligned in that the majority tend to answer in the same way, even if one group feels a little stronger than the other. But in this particular case, both the teachers and the students, and you notice there are more teachers responded to this version of the survey. The first one, there were 99. This one, there's 167, because we're a little further into the process at this point. So this was more of a secondary survey. So more responses, knowing that we were really digging into this. But teachers felt very strongly that the weighting influenced student choices during course selection. And for a large part, the students did agree. So if you look at those numbers there, you're close to 70% of students saying, yeah, the weighting of grades actually does influence the courses that I take. And the other thing that comes up here, and you'll see this as we go through, there were some of our questions, was that teachers felt students may shy away from certain electives because they didn't have any weight. So in other words, would a student take an extra AP science course because it had weight versus taking some other course that they're interested in exploring, but they just chose not to because it didn't help their GPA or didn't look as good on their resume, or not the resume, excuse me, their transcript. Sorry, my power just flashed here. Next slide, please. So what we did then after that survey and seeing that the weighting influenced, at least the sense from both sides was the weighting influences course selection, we went back and said, okay, here are those similar districts, local districts, this is what they do. And because we are so different, let's consider some of these other options and let's have conversations about whether some of these other ways of weighting courses would maybe change the way students select what they select during that course selection process. So we went back to this same beginning point and had deeper and more conversations about what might change or impact some of those choices. Next slide, please. So when I say we put everything on the table, we literally put everything on the table. One of the things we discussed was not weighting anything. In other words, all courses would be the same. Doesn't matter if it's college prep, honors, AP, IB, dual enrollment. What if we just weighted everything the same? Because some people strongly believed that that would be the solution. If everything had the same weight, or in other words, nothing had any weight, then kids would pick what they felt was just appropriate for them, and there would be no weighting influencing their decision. What we received through the survey is there were a very small percentage of people, students and staff, that thought that would be a potential solution. But largely, again, you see the green and the blue, which is the disagree and strongly disagree. Students, much more vocal here than the teachers, strongly disagreeing that if you take away the weight, it's going to, they don't believe that courses should be weighted the same. They do see that the rigor involved and the expectations in honors, AP, IB, dual enrollment are more than what is the expectation of a college prep course. Again, that's the student response. And the teachers, while not as strongly responding there with the negative side or disagreeing, they are in alignment with the students in this particular case. So our staff and students largely did not feel that unweighting everything was the solution to the course selection process. Next slide, please. So going deeper, we said, okay, do you then believe that honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment should be weighted more than our college prep courses? Right. So we didn't just leave it open to interpretation that that's what they meant. We said, okay, let's specifically call that out. Do you feel that those other courses should be weighted more than a college prep course? And again, here, it's almost the exact flip of the previous slide, right? The students strongly agreed that those courses should have more weight, and the teachers agreed, but not as strongly as the students. So that kind of got us our answer of not only do we think things shouldn't be weighted or unweighted, we do believe as a whole, for the most part, that there should be some additional weight for these particular levels of courses. Next slide. Going even further, can you go back one? Thanks. Going even further, we asked the question, because again, remember some of those systems, you know, AP was weighted differently than honors and things like that. So we said, do you believe or feel that AP, IB, and dual enrollment should receive more weight than an honors course? So now we're getting a little deeper with what people believe. And again, here you see the students and the staff largely agreeing, students again more strongly, that AP and IB and dual enrollment. Now remember, those three levels of courses are the courses that some colleges provide credit for taking those courses and getting a certain grade, whereas honors is more of a local designation. But AP, IB, and dual enrollment, those are the courses you can typically receive college credits for. And the students and staff did believe, for the most part, that those courses should be weighted a little differently than honors. Next slide, please. Going back to that chart of all the other districts and how they were doing what they were doing with weighted grades, we narrowed it down to 3 of those districts that had the split, right? So these are the districts where honors was weighted differently than AP. These districts didn't have IB. They didn't specifically call out dual enrollment. But what I will share is the state did mandate that you weight your dual enrollment classes the same way you weight your AP. So that's not a local choice. So however you decide you're going to weight your AP courses, you do also have to weight your dual enrollment courses in that same way. So these were the 3 districts that we had in the chart that split. So again, you see the different multipliers. Most of the districts, so if you look at Wissahickon and North Allegheny, their AP courses are weighted twice as much as their honors courses. So a 0.15 versus a 0.30, a 0.125 versus a 0.25. So double the weight. Even TE that has that multiplier, which is very unique to them, it's double the multiplier, 12.5% versus 25%. So that's what other districts were doing. Next slide, please. We, in the end, kind of talked through not making such a big distinction there. Again, remember, right now, all of our courses were weighted the same way with the +1, regardless of level. And where we narrowed it down to was a 0.15, you know, largely they felt that was a good starting point, and then a 0.25 instead of a 0.30. We just felt like we didn't need that to be twice as much weight as an honors course. So we posed the question, what would happen if we went with that system? Adding a 0.15 for our honors courses and a 0.25 for AP, IB, and dual enrollment. And the question really was, how would that impact what you take? So think about this question 2 ways. For the teacher side, it said students would take the same number of courses, where if it was a student taking the survey, it would say, I would take the same number of honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses if the weighting changed to this. That's a significant change from where we're at now. So we were very interested in this answer. So based on that change being on the table, what you see is, again, for the most part, we see the light blues and the orange colors coming through more strongly here than the opposite. When that means students and staff largely believed that regardless of that weighting system changing, students would still take the same number of IP, AB, dual enrollment, and honors courses that they do right now. What we did see, and I circled it in red there and put the 20%, it's about 20%. About 20% of our students said they would not take the same number of honors, AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. We had to be careful interpreting that, but one of the things that came out in conversation is, and you saw it in the first question, the very first one, is we do have some students who make their choices because of the weight. They admitted that, yes, the +1 weighting influences my course selection. So what we see here in this 20% potentially is the students who say, you know what, a +0.15, that's not enough for me to just take that course. You know, I'm gonna take the college prep version, or I'm not gonna take the AP course. I'm gonna go with the honors level because it's just not worth, you know, the +0.25 to me. So some of the game within the system of taking classes because it gets the +1 bump, this does influence that, but it doesn't influence it in such a way that, you know, half of our students said they're not going to take these courses anymore or anything like that. It was 20%. And in talking through that with staff, they felt that that was likely, you know, where they thought it would land with the students who kind of make the choices based on the weighting rather than the choices that are best for them as a student. Next slide, please. Those of you, many of you I know are familiar.
Jason.
Yeah.
Let's just really quick, because I saw a bunch of chat on the side. Let's just really quick talk about the GPA and the highest point of the GPA. And I think when I wrote my letter, I should have said 0.25 class. The highest class GPA you could get is a 4.25, right? But in an overall GPA, you and I and Rich Marta, who was our counselor, supervisor of counseling, have tried to calculate a trajectory of a student that might get the highest GPA possible. And we know it's not a 4.25. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, when we were trying to figure it out, we felt like it was going to be more like a 4.19, but we're calculating that out. Will you speak to that just a minute, please?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to it. I mean, we're going to get into that through later in the presentation, but if we want to do it now, that's fine. The reason it can't be a 4.25 is because not every course has weighting. So for instance, and again, we're getting very ahead of ourselves right now with answering that question because there's two parts of this presentation that are going to help answer that. But some of the changes are all courses counting in the GPA calculation. And because of that, not all courses are come with honors weighting. And so when you do that, you can't just have the maximum number anymore because some of the courses being averaged into the GPA don't have additional weight. So some of the courses that are included only have a 4.0 maximum. So it drops down the highest total. Okay. So I think we should probably get into that more as we go through because it'll make sense after we talk through some of these other things. Alexis, you okay with that? If we kind of hold a little bit, but that's why it's like 4.17, 4.19, somewhere in that range is probably where that shakes out if someone needs that answer real quick. But I think it's going to make more sense if we're able to go through the rest of the process here.
Sure.
Okay, so let's jump back in here. I wanted to talk about the course selection process because honestly, this is part of the answer to the question, right? It depends on student choice. Those of you who have kids who have gone through the high school or in the high school, you're familiar with the process. Those of you who don't yet have that situation, it's important to understand the process. So this is how it works. In our system at the high schools, students can take any level of a course that's available, right? We have teacher recommendations of what course a student should maybe take the following year, but that is all that is. It's a recommendation. Students can override that recommendation. They can choose any level that they want. The prerequisite recommendations are just that. They're part of the decision process. They help guide the students. But teacher recommendations are strictly there to help students and parents kind of make those choices. Again, right now, with everything being a +1, you know, if a student was recommended by a teacher that says you should really consider taking the college prep version of this course next year, that's where I see you being largely successful. You know, some students ignore that, and this goes back to that 20% and say, well, I'm going to take honors because I want the +1. Okay, and that happens. And there's no gatekeepers, there's no roadblocks to that. Students can make that choice. So they don't have to follow the recommendations. There are also guidelines in the program planning guide when they make these choices that say, you know, students who are successful in this course typically have this grade coming out of the prior course, those kind of things. Again, those are there to guide the decisions, but they're not roadblocks or gatekeepers for kids. But again, back to the survey results, you know, the weighting does seem to influence the decision process for students. And largely the students did admit that it does. So that's the process, but I want to make sure people understand that in the end, it's student choice that really impacts the courses that they take. And that's part of what we were trying to undo through the changes is allowing students to make choices that make sense for them, not letting the system influence those decisions and choices. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in the end, this is what we recommended to the board and what was ultimately adopted. We were changing our system to a +0.15 for honors courses and +0.25 for AP, IB, and dual enrollment. And as we've shared, it seems like students and teachers both recognize that there's additional rigor and expectations of some of those higher courses. And for us, and I didn't speak about this much, but this is the other piece of it. Adding a +1 is a huge difference. It's a whole letter grade, essentially. It's a +1. So students who do take the college prep version of courses, it's a huge gap. So we, because of our system, create this huge gap between college prep and honors, AP, IB, dual enrollment of a whole letter grade just because of the courses that students take. And that's, again, part of why it influences those choices during course selection. You're immediately, as a student, giving yourself a difference of a +1 for someone who, decided to take one of those levels and you didn't. So we're trying to undo that system a little bit, and again, make it more about student choice for what makes sense for them and what they're interested in. So there's not such a big influence because of the weighting of grades. So that's kind of how we landed on where we did with weighted grades. And again, there's things about colleges and things. All colleges do things differently. We had Rich Marta, who is our head of counseling for the district. He also was a former college admissions counselor. And in the end, all colleges do what they do differently. Some of them recalculate everything. Some of them include electives in the calculation. Some of them don't. Some of them just take the grade as it comes to them. They're all different. And there's no way to streamline that process. Similar to when I presented, here's what all the different high schools around us do with weighted grades. It's all different. So there's no one system that is the right system. So that's why we have to really think about what do we want the system to be that's going to be best for our students. And in this case, right now, we know the weighting system we have is different than everyone else, and it does influence course selection. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to get into GPA. And so just know that we've talked about, the weighting of grades, and obviously the weighted grades does influence GPA calculation. Right now, those systems being a +1 or not anything. So CP being whatever you earn and everything else being what you earned +1, it does influence your GPA calculation. But there are other layers to that right now in our current system. And again, some of the changes that we recommended and adopted are hopefully going to change things for students going forward as they come into the high school next year. Next slide. Back to the basics. First question, do we believe GPA is important? And then, again, everything was on the table, and we have staff members that think GPA is not important. And again, I think some of that influence is, some colleges may not use GPA as a top, indicator of student success. They might look at other things, but I can say very soundly that the majority of colleges do look at GPA as the number one. That's their number one influencer as far as students being enrolled in their school. So GPA is important. Students and staff both did feel that way. And again, having someone on our staff who's a former college admissions officer helps with some of that. It is important, and it is a piece of what is used to determine students getting into the colleges and universities. So GPA is important, but we started there just to see where our staff and students were with that. And so that's what we see. Next slide, please. This was more just to paint a picture for you. Again, this is stuff you don't see really on the back end of things, but this was the 2023 graduate information. So just looking at our numbers, so 83% of our graduates were a 3.0 or higher GPA. So put that in perspective. So that's above a B average. 57%, almost 60% of our students had a 4.0 GPA or higher. So think about that. And only 3% of our students had below a C average. So that's kind of our, for this presentation, our portrait of a graduate. That's what our graduating class looks like from a GPA perspective. Right now, in our current system, GPA is calculated by only averaging math, science, English, social studies, and world language, what we consider to be our 5 core areas. Electives are not included in the GPA calculation. And again, to put that in perspective for us at Lower Merion, right now, our dual enrollment courses exist in our business department. And because the business department isn't included in GPA, we weren't even including that in the calculation of a student's GPA as they're applying for college. So students who were taking college level courses and getting a college transcript for taking those courses were not in the GPA. We did start including them last year because the state made the requirement that you have to, and so we did. But that was a change just last year. Up until that point, we weren't including them because they were considered an elective area, even though it was college level coursework. Again, the system as it exists, only using the cores, any student whose strengths are in those other areas, and we can continue talking about the dual enrollment as an example. The number one major that kids choose when they go to college is business. So our college business courses were not part of the GPA. So that's just an example. The students whose areas of strength are outside of those core five, really, it's not represented in their GPA. So they're trying to get a GPA based on areas for them that aren't their strength or their priority. These are students who may go on with music, the arts, things like that. They're not represented. Their GPA doesn't represent those strengths for them. So they have to find ways to do that in other ways, like through a portfolio or things like that. So we recognize that. And again, the committee work that's been ongoing for 20 plus years, this is what it does. It looks at where are some of the inequities in what we do and how do we make some changes that make sense for kids. Go ahead, next slide. So similar question, but different, right? The question we asked previously was, does the +1 influence your choices? This one's a little different. Do you intentionally select courses that boost your GPA? Again, knowing that only the 5 core areas influence GPA, are you choosing courses in those 5 areas because you know they will influence your GPA? And that's the idea of, are they taking an extra, AP science course versus, taking an elective? So little different. Teachers think it strongly influences students' decisions. They believe students don't take as many electives because they want to take things that influence the GPA. The student side, it was a little more balanced. You see more of a bell curve answer here. So some students are saying, yes, it does. Other ones are saying, no, I don't really do that. It's sort of a middle of the road kind of thing. So you have as many that do as you do that don't. So not as strong here. So GPA maybe wasn't the only influencer for students, but the +1 definitely was. Next slide. This one, do we believe that all courses should be included in the GPA? And what you see here is instead of a bell curve, you see it now skewed to one side for the students. More students felt that everything should be included than don't. So you see that coming through, and teachers very strongly believe that everything should be included for students. And all this means is, the body of work, and I will say that in most districts, this is what happens when they calculate GPA. Every course that shows up on a student transcript is represented in their GPA. So your GPA as a student, when you apply to schools or whatever you do with that, it is representative of your entire body of work as a student from grades 9 through 12. So in our system right now, that is not the case. For us, it's math, science, English, social studies, and world language. It's not everything you've done, taken, or shown that you can and can't do and where your strengths lie, if they're outside the core. Next slide, please. So going back to this question, and this was a hot topic for us internally, would students take more electives if they were counted in the GPA? And teachers felt pretty strongly that yes, they would. And there was debate whether students would do that or not. And what we found is 50% of our students said they would take more electives if they were included in that GPA calculation. And that was honestly a little bit of a surprise. We didn't think it was going to be that big of a number. But what that's telling us is about half of our students would choose courses differently and likely take electives that they're not taking now because of the system as it exists. So that was a big indicator for us that we had to do something. And then so we moved forward and made some recommendations about how we calculate GPA and really shifted more to that idea of a GPA being the body of all students' work. Next slide. So here's where we landed. All courses on a transcript would be part of the GPA. Again, as I shared, most high schools, that's the process in calculating GPA. It's a personal thing too, but it just is a better representation of what students know and can do when you include everything. And it also, gives them opportunities to take courses because knowing that I take this course, it's going to be part of my GPA, it's going to be represented in what I do. And it's more inclusive for us. And I know that's something that we work towards really hard at Lower Merion, is being inclusive and having everything be represented for all students, regardless of where their particular strengths lie, is the right direction to go. So that's where we landed, and that's what moved forward. Next slide. So credits for graduation, this is a real quick one. And then if there's, Alexis, we can decide if we want to go back to the GPA thing. Let's go to the graduation, next slide. So this is a real quick one here, but we have senior project. Again, if you're not familiar, all the students in our district do a senior project. The state used to require all students to do a senior project as part of the graduation requirements. They did eliminate that several years back, and districts then had a choice. They could continue it if they wanted to, but it's no longer a state requirement. At Lower Merion, we do continue to do senior project. So these are things where students do volunteer work, they do career exploration, different things like that. They're out in the community, they're out in the world doing different things, and then they come present on their findings and what the experience was like. The state does require 21 credits for graduation. That is a state minimum. And within those 21 credits, there are specific requirements. Like you have to have 3 years of math, 3 years of science, 4 years of English. Like there's requirements. It's very specific where those 21 come from. But the 21, they do not come from the inclusion of senior project. Right now, we were including senior project as part of the 21 credits in our district. And because that's no longer a state requirement and instead it's a local requirement for us, we have to add on a 0.5 credit to our graduation requirements. It doesn't really change anything for the students a whole lot here because they're all doing senior project, but we do have to make our graduation number 21.5 instead of 21, which is what it is right now, to account for the fact that we, Lower Merion School District, are requiring students to do a senior project. It actually becomes a local requirement rather than a state requirement, and it can't be included as part of those 21 credits that we have right now because they're already accounted for in other ways. So it's a real minor change for us, but it's a half credit requirement difference because of the senior project completion. Next slide. So just kind of coming full circle, this has all the changes on one slide, and this would be an opportunity maybe for us to revisit questions specific to my part of the presentation. So the changes for weighting, instead of +1 for everything that's not college prep, we have plus 0.15 for honors, plus 0.25 for AP, IB, and dual enrollment. That begins with the incoming 9th grade students. Students who are already in the old system, the current system, the one that's in place this year, they continue with that system and follow it all the way through. It doesn't make sense to undo a system that influenced student choices and some of what they did and change their GPA calculation when they're already 1, 2, or 3 years into that process. So it would begin with the incoming 9th grade class where they know the new system, they know the different weighting, and they can make choices based on that new system. Second part of this was including all courses in a GPA. That's a difference. That again would start with the incoming 9th grade class. So they know everything counts now. It's a difference versus those students who came in again 1, 2, or 3 years into the process where they knew math, science, English, social studies, and world language were the only ones counting. We now have a new system. So again, those 9th grade students coming into that new system. The other thing I'll say about that is, I would imagine many of us went through college that are on this virtual call. When you go to college, when you enter as a freshman, you're given your program. Back in the day for me, I was given a program guide. Now it's electronic, but you were given a guide, and whatever the requirements were when you entered as a 9th grade student, those stayed your requirements through graduation. It didn't change in process. So think of it the same way. These students coming in as 9th grade, there's changes to the system. We want them to know about the changes as they come into the system. What we don't want to do is change the system in the middle of the process for students who are already into the old system and knew what was expected of them when they came in as 9th graders. And the third piece there is just about the senior project, that half credit added because of our local senior project requirement. So those are the big changes at the high school relating to weighted grades, how we calculate GPA, and then the graduation requirement number changing slightly. So this is probably a good point for us to just kind of entertain some questions about that part.
Thank you. I think that would be great. We do have a lot of questions in the chat that should probably be read through. And I actually have a few really quick questions just to kind of get us all on the same. I'm curious if in the data you have the percentage of kids that are taking like CP versus honors versus AP, what kinds of mixes, kids taking 5 APs versus 4, 3, like how have you broken that down? Because I'm actually kind of curious about the 20%. I see a lot of this, and I see a lot of this having different benefits for different kids in different ways. And for some, I also see where it's going to hurt them. And those are the ones that I'm kind of focused on. Yeah, so actually maybe we can just open it up, but I was just wondering more about the data because I do have questions, but I'd like to kind of let everyone else have a chance to speak. But do you have that information on like percent of kids taking 1, 2, 3 APs, how that kind of plays out and how that affects that 20% in that slide of kids who would not take the same courses depending on the GPA?
So it's a tricky answer, and here's why. Because it was an anonymous student survey. So we don't know who those 20% of students were. We don't know which group per se is saying, I wouldn't do this now. So what we don't know is, are those students that were taking honors instead of a CP version? Are they students that were taking AP instead of honors? We don't know. So it's really hard to tease that out. And we had to really keep it that way because we wanted the students to give us answers that were real answers and not be worried about someone then following up because they answered a certain way.
Okay. I assume there are questions out there because I see them in the chat. Does anyone want to ask? If you have questions, I guess raise your hand.
Do you want to go through the chat questions first?
Yeah, we could do that. I was just trying to go up to the top.
Or maybe we just go from bottom to top, because I think people were answering each other's questions.
Okay. What are you going to tell colleges? Currently, GPA is reported out of weighted max of 5.0, but now weighted max seems to be somewhat undefined. Some schools report out of the base max. Some schools report out of the base max, not weighted max. So ours would currently be out of 4.0. This might be something to consider. I do know, and I can maybe answer this a little bit, that there is a profile sheet that Lower Merion School District sends out when our kids apply to college. It gives information on the courses that we offer and how they're weighted. So when colleges look at Lower Merion School District and they look at Harridan and LM, they know exactly which courses we offer and how those classes are weighted. So they will now kind of understand that GPA doesn't go up to 5.0.
Let me talk about that just a little bit more, Lisa, if you don't mind. Okay, so we do put out a school profile, and we've met with the high school counselors. I've been texting Rich Marta on this side to see if he could join us, just because he might be able to answer some of those questions a little bit more as well. But when we had the conversation with, I'm sorry, as he's texting me, so I apologize for that as I'm looking. We are going to, on our school profiles, make a note that our weighting scale will change, so that all the colleges are aware of it. In addition to that, we have connections, our counselors connect with the college admissions counselors on a regular basis. So we have 3 years to make sure that colleges know that this system is changing. And I think it's EJ, of course, I don't have my glasses on, but your question's very appropriate in that Jason, myself, and Rich had a conversation, I think probably a week ago. And what we're doing is we're reaching out to the schools that we know have the different weights for honors, AP, IB, dual enrollment, because we want to ask them, how are they reporting it to colleges? Some of them report it when we look based on the highest GPA of the previous senior class. some of them report the way you're talking about. And so we will, we haven't made a final determination on how we're going to report it on our school profile yet. We're really investigating what's happening in some of our like districts to see how they report out. So, so it could be based on the senior class, the highest GPA the year before. That's what we've seen, but we're not at a final place where we're determined that yet. Jason, anything else that I missed on that question?
No, but I'll echo it because, you know, Rich and I sat and dug into it through a bunch of different schools to look. And that's really what we found is schools that had, and again, EJ, I don't want to call you EJ, but it's EJ in the chat. That's what we really found. They would say in their profile statement, we use a weighted 4.0 scale, and then they would say what the highest GPA was from the previous year. And that was consistent across multiple schools that were in a similar system like that. That's how they did. They didn't actually say the highest GPA a student can earn in our system is X. It was, this was the highest GPA earned last year in our system.
Thank you. That's helpful. Another question, will ninth graders be, oops, sorry, it moved. Will ninth graders be able to take any AP classes? What about 10th graders?
So the answer is yes. There are very few, and I will preface the answer here by saying that College Board actually doesn't recommend that students in 9th or 10th grade take AP courses. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but their recommendation is these are designed for juniors and seniors, similar to IB, which starts in the junior year. But we do have some that are available. The one that comes to mind right away for 9th graders is our computer science course. We have 2 different computer science courses, one of which is accessible to all 9th graders, the other depending on your computer science background. But it's basically an intro to computer science. It's called AP Computer Science Principles. It's kind of an exploratory computer science course, and that's open to all 9th grade students. Same thing, it's obviously open to 10th grade students if they don't take it in 9th grade. There's also some other entry-level computer science you can take, and then that would lead into that being your second year 10th grade course. So that's really the one that's probably the most accessible to 9th and 10th graders. Outside of that, it pretty much starts in the junior year with some of the upper level electives. A lot of the AP courses that exist assume you've taken either a college prep or an honors level course in the same area prior, and that goes deeper. So that's the challenge with doing it sooner.
And we're not going to make adjustments to that. Our intention is not to offer more APs at an earlier age for students to take them. We want to make sure we're developmentally appropriate with that.
And then there's a comment here from EJ. Unfortunately, students are still going to make choices based on weighting and GPA. For example, my rising freshman is considering taking honors art and AP computer science instead of what they really want to take, ceramics and comp sci 1 and 2, to maximize GPA and not be a disadvantage down the line. Is that something that you can speak to? I mean, that's something that's kind of my concern as well, that 20% that you had spoken about might be some of the higher achieving students who do look at kind of their GPAs, and they've been very calculated, no pun intended, in how they, here's Mr. Marta, in how they kind of do their course selection. I do see for a number of students how having electives in the GPA is going to really help. But at the same time, I think it's gonna, sorry, there's a lot of noise behind me. I think at the same time, it could have the adverse effect for a number of students. Is that something that you can speak to?
So I'll take that question. So as long as we're going to weight courses, and this goes back to that debate of unweighting everything, but as long as we're going to weight certain courses differently, it's going to have an impact on choice, even if it's such a small amount, right? But what I can tell you is when Dr. McGloin talked about us trying to calculate what the new max GPA was, I mean, we used some crazy number of what would be the maximum number of IB AP classes a student could possibly take, and what would that look like? And the GPA, like we said, was something like 4.17, 18, or 19, something like that. What you had to, when we took out like 8 of those courses, 8 AP or IB courses, it only drops the GPA like a couple hundredths of a point. So the difference is so small, and people don't understand that, but the difference is so small when you average 4 years worth of courses together that it has a really, really minor impact. And again, it comes back full circle to that question about what's the max GPA. I mean, it's hard to put out what the max GPA is because we don't know what the maximum number of courses a student could take and be successful in is. It's really hard. Even our students that take a whole bunch of AP classes, they may not take the freshman computer science AP class, so they don't have that one. So the number of AP and IB courses a student takes obviously impacts that GPA calculation, even the dual enrollment. And now with the honors being different, so yeah, there's that difference there. There's no way to completely undo the system, but what we've done through the changes is minimized that as much as we can, but still recognizing the differences in those levels.
Yes, some of that's on us to make sure that we're educating students. Rich did join MARTA, and our counselors, our school counselors would work with our students on their choice. So some of it's going to be on us to let students know that it's not going to have as big of an influence on your GPA as you might think. We do not give out class rank. Class rank is not something as a district that we even publish at all. The only time we would ever give out a class rank is if we were asked, and that's by typically, and Rich can talk to this, but it's typically a military academy that might ask for that. Other than that, we don't calculate class rank. So some of this is us educating our students about how does it impact your choices, how do they impact your GPA as well.
I'm glad Mr. Marta's here. I was actually, one of my questions was whether or not this sort of, if this process kind of was engaged with the wellness committee that I know has been sort of newly formed, and it would be great, I don't know if there was any kind of collaboration there.
Well, there's overlap. So we have, like Scott Weinstein is leading one of the groups, right? And so there's overlap between the wellness committee and all the work that we've done and the voices that we've garnered our information from.
Yeah, let me just jump in here. That is a great correlation. It's not like it was an idea out of the wellness committee, because just you mentioned it was really regenerated last year because of some of the state reporting that was required, and we're going to continue on with it. This work started many years ago. I'm going to say, and Jason would know, I'm going to say like 7 or 8 years ago, maybe. So just know that over all the years, when we moved to this, to anything, a major movement like this, it's with the holistic look at the child's life as they're going through our system, just like Lunch and Learn. That whole concept added to, or was motivated by giving students a break during the day, giving them some freedom and choice to exercise their need or want to relax, eat, exercise, see a teacher, be together. Same thing with start time. So all this does go into that bucket of what are we doing to help support a student, but at the same time still placing our students in a light that people will recognize the curriculums that we run and the district that we have. So I hope that makes sense.
That does. Great. Thank you. I see another question from Regine here. Alternatively, are all elective courses in course subject areas included in the GPA calculation? And I'm assuming that means like if a student's taking 2 science classes their junior year, are they both included in the GPA?
Yes,
Yeah,
all
yes.
4 classes, whether it's an elective or it's a mandatory. So in science, I think mostly everybody on the call knows that biology really is our only mandatory course, although you have to take 3 credits of science to graduate from high school. So, but all 4 and elective courses in those 5 core areas are what currently is counted towards a GPA.
Okay, great. And I'm going up through the chat, but if anyone does want to ask a question live, feel free to raise your hand. We'll see you.
Did you just talk a little bit about, like when I was reading through the chat, people were talking about how colleges there's that belief that all colleges recalculate courses when the students come in and what they're looking for as well, because GPA is only one factor of college admissions. So could you just talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so it's no, let's parallel how high schools create GPA or calculate GPA and how college admissions run their decision rubric. There's a billion different ways to do it, and there's a billion different ways that high schools calculate their GPA and how colleges run their rubric for admission. So it's not a standard process that everybody recalculates it. I will tell you that a good majority of schools, so I'm going to say 55% of schools across the country, maybe higher, yes, they recalculate it so that everyone that they're evaluating for admission is on a level playing ground. So regardless if we wait or don't wait, or if Conestoga waits or doesn't wait, or if we have IB and a school does or doesn't, all that goes away when a college retakes the grades, the course and the grades, and recalculates it. And many of them will give power or weight if a student has an honors class or a AP or IB class, just like we do, but they do it much more simplistically. Just again, so that when they are evaluating Rich Marta from Lower Merion and Bob Smith from Conestoga and somebody else from Radnor, that there are 3 compatible schools with 3 compatible rigorous curriculums, and they kind of level the playing field that way. Having said that, and I use the word rubric, admissions will use the word holistic. They take a holistic approach to the decision that they make. What they do is they evaluate the rigor of the courses. They evaluate the grade that the student received in the course. They evaluate the activities or jobs or leaderships or volunteering, and different schools give all that different weight. There's a lot of liberal arts colleges that believe in a student should volunteer their time, and they give extra weight when a student does that. Some don't care. It's just another activity. And then you have things like recommendations. But what a school will never, ever tell you is that they have been keeping data for probably as long as I was in admissions 40 years ago. We kept data on the success of students who we admitted and the graduation rate of those students from that school or school district. So as an example is, if a student was applying to Temple, instead of Temple saying, oh, we know Lower Merion, they're really good, instead of saying that, we would run yearly statistics on a 4, 5, 6, 10-year frame of how many students did we admit from Lower Merion, how many were successful in completing 4 years at my institution, and what sometimes they go to the level of what was their GPA. So what was their GPA before they entered, meaning graduating from high school, and what was their GPA when they left the institution. And therefore, what a lot of schools will do is when they have to take a chance on a student, that becomes really, really important, because that's when they say, Lower Merion successfully educates their kid. Because if they do take a student or they take a chance on a student, they have data that would tell them that's a good chance. That kid, where he might not look like a neighboring school kid or a kid from another state, that we know based on our statistic that those students are successful in our community, in our college. So there's another really, really big piece, and bigger schools like University of Michigan, Penn State, University of Texas, they keep these statistics and they're gigantic. And they have them and they use them. And that's a part that schools will never tell you that they have or that they use, because they use it at different levels at different times. They don't use it all the time. They use it, sparingly, but they do use it, and they use it to brag about their statistics a lot. So I hope that's clear, and I hope that helps.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you. Wait, I see another question. How many decimals do you report out on this? I'm assuming it doesn't go beyond 2.
2.
Rich?
That,
Yeah.
2.
Okay. Do we know what percentage of our kids are in CP honors and AP classes, like how that kind of breaks down?
So we have students that take multiple different levels. So we may have a student that takes a CP in one thing, honors in another, AP in another. So there's not really, I don't know how we would calculate statistically. Now we could calculate how we would calculate statistically how many students like have that. You know what I mean? When you're asking that question. But majority of our students are taking at least one honors class, Rich. That's probably a fair statement, right?
I would agree. I would probably tell you well over 50% of the class takes at least one honors course.
Okay. Do we have other questions on this right now? Oh, one more message popping up. The stats could be per subject. That's true, Monica. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess Monica's suggesting like stats of number of kids in English that are in CP versus honors versus AP versus in, global studies and sciences. That would be interesting to see. I mean, I can't, I completely agree with you, Dr. McCloin. Like, I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on how we talk about this with our kids. But I can say that currently, even though like at home, we talk a lot about balance, the kids get a very different message once they enter the school doors, not even from like their teachers and staff, but from peers. There's a lot of peer pressure that I see happening with our kids. And I see, young kids coming in, like, what do I do to boost my GPA? Should I take IB because it's going to look good on my college transcript? Not really asking the questions for the right reasons. Yeah, I guess I just want to push that.
Yeah. So let me jump in there. You've heard me speak over the years. I often say there's more authority and power at the lunchroom table than there is in our counseling offices. What kids share amongst themselves, for better or worse, good or bad, and what their siblings pass down to them has much more bearing than what we do in the counseling office. Because kids will come in and tell us what they've heard and tell us how it's going to be. And we're like, oh, well, it's like those conversations when we have students who overload everything, and we have that conversation with them and their parents and say it's not necessary, and they turn around and tell us how necessary it's going to be, and the kid's still going to do it. So we debate that all the time.
I think to our kids' credit a little bit, I can tell you from experience, having gone on multiple college tours with my daughter, it is also the message that we get from colleges and universities, and not even just like the uber elite ones, but just there are colleges that will tell you, take the high, if you really want to get into our school, take the highest number of hardest classes that you can and get the best grades you can. And they say that, and then they also are kind of talking about kind of well-rounded kids. There's this dichotomy, this kind of like dual conflicting messages that they get.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. And when we have reps in front of us, we talk about that in our buildings, and they, skirt it. And I have 3 kids. I've been all across the country. I've been in those rooms where I heard the exact same thing. You know, the more competitive college you go to, the more rigor they want to see. And they talk about life balance and they talk about other things. However, you know, my I won't say which child. I have a child who got a C once, and I just said, you know, you didn't do the work that you needed to be more successful in that course. So therefore, in your GPA, so you know you have changed what you think you're going to get into in college because he had a very specific college in mind, and he got mad at me, and my wife turned to him and said, "You do know your dad does this for a living, right?" So you know the reality is there is something to that. But you know, it is a mixed message, particularly from the colleges when you really sit down and talk to them or hear their presentations. It's like when I used to say when I would be listening to their presentations, if you ever listen to all the statistics that they throw out there, you sit there scared. My stomach used to cringe. I'm thinking, I couldn't get into this place. My kids definitely can't get into the place. And then what the reality of it is they take kids like me and they take kids like, you know, the average kids. It's just that they love to brag about their statistics. And there's another flip to that. What they report out as opposed to what they use are 2 different things. I'll give you the SAT. A school may have an SAT minimum of, let's say, 1,000 points. You'll never hear a school says the average SAT here is 1,000. What they'll do is they'll go into the records and they'll pull the highest score a kid ever got on an SAT, and that's what they report out, you know, to their campus. That not the one that they used to make the decision on, but the highest possible score that the kid ever contributed. And sometimes they used to what we called power score or super score. They take the highest English, they match it with the highest math, and then they give the kid a possible score, even though that's not the way they admitted the kid. So I hope that explains a little bit.
Lisa, I've just been reading the chat, and so I want to be clear that when I said that we don't know I can't tell you like from a percentage standpoint how many kids are in like honors and CP, because that's a big question. By course, I could tell you how many students are in CP honors and AP and IB. We have a running total of those. We know how many classes we were running of those. So we will be able to track over time what, if any, impact this has. So I want to just be clear that we do know those statistics for certain, how many students are enrolled in certain classes. I can't share them. Like, so we have the statistics, we have the numbers, but there's a lot of classes, Monica, for me to be able to pull. Think of how many honors, IB and AP classes we have in the district. So that would be a difficult thing for us to share.
There's also a question here about how kids get inducted into the Honor Society. Is that something that you can speak to?
Service, it's GPA. There's multiple factors that have a student inducted into the Honor Society. It's not only about GPA. Service is also a piece of the whole puzzle too. Volunteering, when I say service.
Yeah. Right. There's an application process. The kids are very well known, but that's basically what it is. Yes. A student has to be have done some sort of participation, hopefully service, because the Honor Society is a service organization, GPA, and then no major behavior issue. Generally speaking, that's it.
I do have another question. This is getting a little more nitty gritty, but when you looked at the numbers of how other school districts like Upper St. Clair and Allegheny and Radnor and TE, like how they rank their honors and their AP courses, did you also look at, I mean, I assume that we're pretty comparable to Radnor and TE only because I know those districts a little bit better, but to how our honors classes, like the rigor of our honors classes compare to theirs, like the curriculum I'm speaking about specifically?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I mean, the AP curriculum is set by College Board. I mean, there's no difference that everyone takes the same test at the end of the course. The curriculum is set, it's defined. Honors is going to be whatever an individual school decides is honors. In other words, what makes it different than the college prep version of the course? It's a local decision, there's no comparison across districts of what does your honors class look like compared to mine. Doesn't work like that.
Allison, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
No, I was going to say thank you to all of our presenters, and I think this is an interesting theoretical discussion almost. I know you have all the data and you've been thinking about it for many years. I think the ultimate answer for kids and how they're going to choose and how it's going to affect, their course selection is we don't know yet. And I, based on my interactions, I think with school district administrators, I'm going to trust that you have done a lot of thinking about this and talking to teachers, obviously, and surveying the students. So I think I'm interested in this topic more from a wellness perspective, which we already touched on a little bit, and how it's going to tie in with our Erasing the Finish Line book study conversations in the next month and a half about how we can encourage kids to think about their entire school experience as more than a bunch of numbers, which I understand for a lot of parents is probably the priority, and a lot of parents are very specifically interested in their kids' grades and GPA. So I'm interested in how this is all going to balance out with, and we'll see. But thank you.
And I think to Allison's point, I encourage you all, if you haven't already, joined in and signed up to join in on the book study that we're doing with Dr. Yanni. Our first meeting is on February 27th, and I believe Amy Buckman had sent out an email a few weeks ago. The book is called Erasing the Finish Line, and this is actually what it's really about. It's about kind of looking at our kids' holistic high school experience, helping them develop the skills that they'll need beyond college. Beyond high school to succeed in college and in life. And I think it kind of speaks to the goals that we all want to see, which is seeing our kids be balanced and well-adjusted. So I encourage you to read the book and come join us on the 27th. That's the first of 3 sessions. So thank you. And I see here a comment, bravo to the administration on the changes. They were long overdue.
Any final quick questions? Or do you want to? We're going to set aside middle school report cards for
Sure, we could do that another time.
time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We will get back to that with parents and guardians. And thank you all for joining us and for answering questions and for spending so much time thinking about our kids.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
All right.
you.
Have a great day.